All right, we'll get into it. 7:34 here on the Talk of the Town, Talk 100.7 FM, and making her way in studio. I don't know. I think we may have done this before, but Congresswoman Claudia Tenney joining us on the phone, and then during the interview here, we'll take a break because she's making her way, I think, to the studio, and then she's going to be in studio with us. Do I have that correct, Claudia?
You do. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you? You there?
Well, it's a little chilly out.
I know.
It is. Oh, hopefully you're dressed warm. But did you listen to the last caller weigh in?
He said something. I don't know. Any dairy farmer that supports my opponent is not a legitimate business owner. If they really just don't know anything about his record. So I don't take these things personally. I've been fighting hard for dairy farmers. I have dairy farmers in my family background. I grew up riding horses, and it's incredible that anyone would vote for someone who has a long-standing record in the state assembly that is not good for dairy farmers, someone who's just not. I mean, I look at how hard I fought. Like, for example, the number one issue for dairy farmers and for the Farm Bureau for a number of years has been the minimum wage issue, because it's very tough to get dairy people to work in dairies.
Mm-hmm, right.
And that is the number one issue. They made it their signature issue for a couple of years in the state assembly. And one of the things that always happened is when the minimum wage was made higher than the mandatory federal minimum wage by New York State, there was always an exemption for agriculture. In the last effort by Cuomo, when he went around the state to raise the minimum wage, tried to get it to $15 an hour, the Senate was able to knock it down a little bit. And I'm talking about a forced wage from the government versus a wage that's driven by a strong economy, which makes our wages go up, because of the economy.
Right.
And that really hurts dairy farmers because they're competing in neighboring states where the minimum wage is under still the federal minimum wage, which is less than $8 an hour. And with a lot of the add-ons on the minimum wage, there's all the payroll taxes, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, workers' comp, now we have paid family leave, all those things get added on to the payroll that the employer has to pay as well. And so one of the things that we've done in the past in the state is we've exempted ag, especially dairy farmers, for that reason. Well, the last go-around, there was no exemption for agricultural workers. I think it amounted to less than 50 cents. And that's really hurting our dairy farmers. It is making the cost of labor really high. My opponent has voted repeatedly for increasing property taxes. He voted for the Oneida deal, which actually robbed $1.8 billion, mostly property tax, by the way, mostly property tax, away from taxpayers. And dairy farmers and other ag farmers rely on the land that they use, whether it's for farming or, whether for, growing crops or agriculture with cows and other hoofed animals. This is exactly the opposite of what anyone that's in a farm would want, is to have higher property taxes, which, by the way, everyone says, Cuomo says he's lowered the property taxes. Have you noticed a decrease in your property taxes? I just paid $5,000 for my school tax for the town for New Hartford.
I think there's been an increase.
$5,000. I pay almost $2,500 to the county. My taxes have gone up exponentially since I bought my house 25 years ago. Uh-huh. So it's amazing, and this is hard on people and farmers, especially dairy, who are dependent on the price of milk, which is determined by the federal government. Their price they get for their milk does not come from them being in commerce. It doesn't matter how great your production is. The feds determine what your price is.
Well, Claudia, can we tie this into the new the United States Mexico Canada agreement, or the USMCA, and how this will affect dairy prices and the Class 7 pricing, which is powdered milk and things of that nature?
Yeah, this is actually, I give the president a lot of credit. I thought maybe about a week ago that Justin Trudeau, who is the President of Canada, was not going to go along with this. But look what happened. We end up with a revised NAFTA, which is a promise that the president made. He eliminated the ability of Canada to cheat, which is what Class 7 dairy pricing has been. It's a special kind of ultra-filtered milk proteins that were being dumped into the United States, and then we were not getting to sell those. So he actually helped dairy farmers. That cost us $48 million just in New York State alone, and we are one of the top dairy producers in the nation. So really great that the president was able to negotiate this deal. It helps our auto workers. It helps dairy farmers. It really, as far as like technology, we preserved intellectual property. There's new elements dealing with cybersecurity and career and technical education and programs that will help American workers. And this is great for unions as well, which is why I laugh at a caller like that. I mean, I can't imagine anyone who's in a union or anyone who would vote for my opponent, who has literally voted to take your health care away 3 or 4 times in the state assembly to go to a government takeover of health care, which would destroy all private plans, including any union plan or any plan that you might have had and paid into your entire working days as a member of IBEW or maybe some of those other plans. He voted 3 or 4 times to take that away from you and impose up to a $90 to $120 billion a year tax grab by the taxpayers of New York State, which would require the taxpayers to come up with that kind of money on top of the state budget. And who's going to pay for that? You're going to see the middle-income taxpayers paying for it. You're going to see everyone in New York State pay for it. And on top of that, guess who gets to do that? Guess who gets a benefit from it? Anyone that comes into New York State who becomes a resident of New York State. Illegal immigrants get to go to the front of the line ahead of our Medicare and Social Security recipients. People who work their entire lives to earn those are going to be put to the back of the line because anybody can come into New York State and get this Medicare for all or government takeover of health care, as I call it. It is the new socialism, and it is what is being advocated by the Democratic Party.
Claudia, can I just go back to this trade, U.S.-Mexico trade deal? There's just one question that's kind of brought up from the other side. There's some skepticism, I guess, among some business people who believe that this ultimately, there might be ways around this, and it might not be as good as it's being portrayed, but you're talking about 40 to 45% of truck or car parts that must be made by workers earning at least $16 an hour, as well as the mandate that 75% of vehicles parts must be made in North America, up from 62%. So both those would be, in theory, would be good to try to bring jobs back to North America, the United States in particular. But then there are some people that are, some trade experts, I guess, that are skeptical and claim that American car makers may still ship their production to Japan, Korea, or other countries outside North America because the only penalty they would face is a 2.5% tariff. So some of them might feel, well, for whatever reason, it's more economical to pay that 2.5% tariff. Do you have any thoughts on how to address that?
That's just based on the tariff. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's really important is the tax cuts actually gave an incentive for American companies to repatriate money, first of all, bring billions, tens of billions, it's going to be over $1 trillion by the end of the year, money that's going to be repatriated to create new jobs, and it's going to be now a benefit to use American workers and to create and build things in the United States again. That's one of the benefits. If you add that with the new revised NAFTA deal, or, that's what the American-Canada-Mexico deal, American-Mexico-Canada deal. If you put all that together, you're going to see a benefit for U.S. Production here in the United States, which is already happening. Right. And that's what, taken as a whole, this isn't just an accident. This has been negotiated under the idea of making these things all work together. The tax cuts, incredibly, last week, we voted to make the tax cuts permanent for middle and lower income taxpayers. 95% of the people in this district are benefiting from tax reform. I am astounded that my opponent continues to say that the tax cuts are somehow for the rich. 95% of the people in this district, NY22, upstate New York, the Rust Belt of New York State, are getting a tax cut. You know who's not? The wealthiest people around us. And trust me, they're complaining. The reason Governor Cuomo, who's teamed up with my opponent on just about everything, is suing the federal government is he's worried that wealthy people aren't going to get their lifeline, the state and local tax deduction that they got 100% before, because that money is now going into the Treasury. Mm-hmm. It's money that they are not getting, and they're now paying more into the Treasury so we can support programs like expanding our military where we need to, making it more efficient, protecting Social Security and Medicare. The opposite has happened.